The most dignified person I've ever met or people I've ever met are lifers. I'm trying to dismantle the stereotype, right, around race in prison. So you can tell by the way they like walk, by the way their head is up, by the sense of like dignity that they walk with. You respect them at all times. You don't curse in their presence. You call them such and such. You get yourself together. People are just humans. We're just regular people back there. Like there's people that look like you know, there's all different backgrounds, all different everything.
Welcome to The Race to Social Justice, a podcast that explores the myriad racial and social challenges facing the modern world, with your hosts, Kiva White and John Kepner. Thank you for being part of the courageous conversation, because when it comes to combating social injustices in America, it is not about being confrontational. It is about being conversational.
Hey, hello, John.
Hey, Kiva. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as always. I see we have our super producer, Hogue, joining us on this special edition of our Race to Social Justice podcast series. Welcome, Hogue, my brother. Good to see you as always.
Thank you. Good to see everyone.
Yes. Well, welcome everyone to our Race to Social Justice podcast series. I am Kiva White. I am the Black guy.
And I'm John Kepner. I'm the white guy. Kiva and I share a love of the letter K, our common initial, K for Kiva, K for Kepner, and K for our thirst for knowledge, what Kiva calls the K factor. The goal of these podcasts is to promote racial and social equity and justice through honest and even sometimes difficult dialogue, what we call courageous conversations. Kiva and I have found that our discussions with each other have deepened our respective understandings of racism and our personal responsibilities in that regard. And that led us to invite guests to share their honest experiences and learnings. We hope these conversations will help our listeners and even our guests in their own journeys. So, Kiva, who are our guests today?
Well, John, I'm super excited about today's show. I have the powerhouse team, the pleasure of introducing the powerhouse team behind Die Jim Crow Records, Fury Young and BL Shirelle. Die Jim Crow Records is the first nonprofit record label in the United States history for currently and formerly incarcerated musicians. DCR Records' mission is to dismantle stereotypes around race and prison in America by amplifying the voices of the artists that are incarcerated there. These two individuals have formed a strong but cautious bond that is now inseparable. They are friends, they are collaborators, and now co-executive directors of Die Jim Crow Records. I mean, their leadership and commitment to values of representation, fairness, passion for the cause, and a love for the art at the core of DJC Records. And it's my pleasure to introduce to our listening audiences and our viewers, Fury Young and BL Shirelle. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Great introduction. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, Fury, let's start with you. We always like to get to know a little bit about our guests on the Race to Social Justice podcast. So let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your childhood growing up, where you lived, your parents, and, what you did as a kid.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, gentlemen. It's a pleasure. My childhood, it definitely impacts the work that I do. So I grew up, born and raised in the Lower East Side. I'm actually right now in the tenement apartment that I grew up in. And my dad was a social worker, an artist, and my mom, he's deceased. My mom is a psychologist. So I grew up around two mental health professionals. And some of my earliest memories are at my dad's job, which was this place called Foundation House. And it was for people who were, drug addicts, or a lot had been incarcerated. Some were unhoused people. And so some of my earliest memories are being like in the rec room and, they're watching really raunchy movies like New Jack City and Set It Off, Long Kiss Goodnight,
Classic.
Yep, all classics. Yep. I actually haven't seen Set It Off, to my shame, utter shame. But But yeah, that was my childhood, growing up in the Lower East Side around all types of people. It was a very different neighborhood then. 7 years before I was born, the New York Times called it the drug capital of the world. By 1989, it was starting to clean up a little bit, but it was still a little rough around the edges. It wasn't very violent. There weren't really like that many shootings or anything like that, but it was a lot of drugs. And, you'd see sex workers on the street. A family friend has this story she loves to tell of me as a baby saying, "Look, mommy, it's a prostitute." So, that was the Lower East Side as a kid. And it was a community neighborhood though. And it also had a lot of bohemian artists and just all types from all walks of life. So I think that very much contributes to my ethos with DJC. And the last thing I'll say about my childhood is it was very artistic. My dad was an artist, really great artist, and he exposed me and my older sibling Royal to a lot of incredible art. So that was one of the most rich things about my childhood.
Wow. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Fury. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
BL, same to you. Tell us about your growing up childhood.
Yes, well, it wasn't like Fury's, that's for sure. I'm born and raised in Philadelphia. I grew up with a very, very supportive and pretty successful grandmother. So she owned like a couple properties and stuff like that. So I wasn't, poor or anything like that. But my mother was a drug addict. She got caught up in the crack epidemic in the early 90s. And I was the oldest of 4 siblings. I have another sibling, but she was outside of my dad's daughter. But so I was the oldest, and the way the family dynamic worked, due to my mom having like a drug issue, me and my mom were like sisters, and her sister, who was my aunt, we were all like sisters, and my grandma was kind of like the mom. So by the time, I became a teenager, me and my mom were like thick as thieves, running around, selling drugs together, getting locked up, all kinds of stuff. I excelled at school early on. Like I did very good. I always had great teachers. They always supported me. One of my teachers introduced me to writing poetry and published a book for me in the 3rd grade of my poetry. I was in a lot of contests and stuff like that. But I still had this whole fucked up family life. So by the time I entered 9th grade, I didn't finish. I was going in and out of placements and stuff like that. And when I turned 18, around that time, I got into a shootout with the police, got shot, got locked up, of course. I didn't know that the guy was a cop. He was an undercover gentleman. But I went to prison and I served 10 years. And I started my Dodge and Crow career while I was in prison.
Where were you in prison?
I was in prison in Pennsylvania. So SCI Muncie, SCI Cambridge Springs. I actually had 2 stints in prison. So I only got a 6 to 12 on the police shooting. I took it to trial. It was a lot of different factors that went into that whole perfect storm. Like I said, I didn't know that he was a police officer at the time. So I think that the judge kind of let me off, and I was really young. But I wasn't really prepared to be successful in the outside world. So I made it out for maybe close to 2 years, and then I went back. So that's how I ended up doing the 10 collectively.
Okay. You see that
y'all don't gotta look so sad about it.
Hogan and I are both we're both from Philadelphia. That's why I wonder where you. I'll tell you later on. I have a comment on the prison thing, but I'd like to know what's the story that brought the 2 of you together? What from those beginnings, those very different beginnings, New York, Philadelphia, and everything else. What's the storyline that converged that you are partners together and created this record company and doing this great music and your mission with recording incarcerated people in prison?
So music was the thing, right? Obviously. I did something called a TEDx, like a TED Talk while I was in prison. My band name was Shirelle. This was on my second stint in prison. And I did a TED Talk with a medley of songs. And me and my band performed those things, just me and some friends that I was locked up with. Fury was working on an album about mass incarceration called Die Jim Crow. And that album was supposed to start from, the origination of the Jim Crow term, which started from a song all the way through the war on drugs, tough on crime, with a character. It was like a conceptual album. So he saw the TEDx and he sent a letter to my band. And one of the members of the band that he sent the letter to gave it to me because I was the band leader. So I was the writer of the songs. I was the composer of the music. And I got the format and I was inspired by it and I started writing to it. And those was my first 2 professional placements on the Die Jim Crow EP. I wrote 2 songs while I was incarcerated.
Wow. And up to that point, I've been doing the album for 2 years. So I'd started in 2013 around like March or so. And I've been starting to reach out to people across the country and also just finding formerly incarcerated people to record with. And I had really no idea what I was doing, but I just kind of followed my instincts and my passion. And when I saw that TEDx, I was really blown away by BL's performance and also an artist by the name of Simply Naomi. Well, that's what she goes by now. But she was Naomi Blount back then when she was a lifer at the time, who'd served like over 30 years. So I reached out to both of them and didn't get access to record in the prison, but luckily BL got out shortly after that. And we just hit the ground running. Wow. So here we are now. That was 7 years ago.
Okay. So are you a singer-songwriter also?
Yeah. So yes, is the short answer. To pick you up to where from my childhood to where DJC started, that's a good question to get there. Is that I actually wanted to be a filmmaker from a very young age. A lot of the art that I was exposed to that impressed me the most, especially from my dad, was old movies. My dad was really old. He was born in 1941. So he had me when he was 49. So he took me to Film Forum and, we'd see movies like Shot Corridor by Sam Fuller or Sunset Boulevard by Billy Wilder, just really good films that had a big impact on me. And I really like Jackie Chan and shit like that too, fun stuff. But I really wanted to be a film director. And then when I was in my late teens after high school, I did like 1 year of vocational kind of film school and just never wanted to go to college, went straight into making movies and did that for a few years and then got kind of tired of it, wanted to expand my horizons. And so on a total whim, I moved to LA, signed up for some community college classes and enrolled in a class on 20th century genocide as one of them. And I moved there. I didn't know anyone and started taking the classes and was really impressed by, shook by, would be a better word, this genocide class, and started to see my interest shift. I always had a big interest in using music in the films that I wanted to make. So music has always been with me, and I started plucking a little guitar around then. But since I was so lonely and had really nothing better to do, I started writing poetry, lyrics, and learning a ton about history. And then Occupy Wall Street started like a week later. And it was like this perfect storm. I got super interested in activism. It took me several months. I was very skeptical at first, but reading about the history, I think at the same time is what did it. That's what sold me. So that's when I started getting into music more. And kind of the activism thing was like, well, wait a second. Why do I want to live my life just behind a camera? And I had wanted to make narrative films, not documentaries. I didn't want to be Errol Morris or whatever. So it just kind of was like fuck the movie thing. You know, I want to be out there with the people. I want to give back. I want to do music. I want to see the reactions performing and stuff like that. And then eventually came back to New York, read the book, The New Jim Crow, was listening to a lot of Pink Floyd, The Wall. And that's when the idea came to me. 2013, I was 23 years old.
Wow. When did you all decide to so, you know, in the music industry is a profit-bearing industry. And so I'm curious to hear your story around making this into a nonprofit, because I think it's an advocacy / activist move. And at the same time, how were you able to, you know, to make Die Jim Crow record into a nonprofit? And what was the story behind that? To you know, most people that are in the music industry is in it to become famous and to make money. And so share a little bit about that portion of it becoming a nonprofit. What was the theory behind that?
Well, that was 2018. And it was actually just one of those, you know, necessity is the mother of invention things. I mean, we needed funding. And because we were an activist project, a lot of people were telling me, you know, have you considered forming a nonprofit so you can apply to grants? And eventually I did. Actually, I don't know if I've ever told this on camera, but this is kind of funny. The thing that tipped me over the edge was I got denied from trying to record in Bedford Hills, which is an upstate prison for women in New York. And they used some bullshit excuse like, because you're not a nonprofit, you can't come in here. And that's when I was like, all right, it's a wrap. Yeah. I'm forming a fucking nonprofit. Like, this is bullshit. So then I did. Wow. Yeah. And it's been a really good model for us. I mean, I don't know how we would have gotten the capital to, you know, start it as a for-profit. Like, I'm not an independently wealthy person. You know, it was slow at first getting grants, but now we've gotten tons. And it's like, we always stay in the black because we're a nonprofit. We're able to get grants for projects that are a little bit unconventional, sort of more like art for art's sake, not for the sake of getting mad rich. So it's been a really good model so far, I think.
That's awesome. I think that was a great strategy. You know, a great platform to build your record company off of, because, you know, everybody wants to support, from what I understand, everybody wants to support something meaningful, you know, in terms of philanthropy. And so I think there's a lot of hearts that will be into what you all are doing, because, you know, that's what attracted, you know, when I spoke to your brother Royale, I mean, I just thought it was just amazing what y'all was doing, and it was nonprofit. And so that's a great niche. Now, do you all work with adults, or do you also work with the young incarcerated, like youth that are incarcerated, like young adults, 19?
So we do have a group called YOU Boys. They were in a youth offender unit in Mississippi. So yeah, we do work with youth, but also I think that the main thing that came from the nonprofit model was that our contracts, you know, our artists own their masters, right? Because we're a nonprofit. There is no, like Fury said, there is no recoup stage. We're always in the black. So for that, we get to, you know, have our artists own their masters. We only license the project. So we don't even sign the artists. Like, they're still free to do whatever they want. The project that we create with them is what's licensed, and it's not owned by us. It's just licensed. And, you know, we split all royalties 60-40, artist majority. It's a very artist friendly contract. And, you know, I'm really proud of that. You know,
it's good.
The best thing about it being a nonprofit, I think.
Now, this is my last question, and I'll punt it to Hope, see if he has any thoughts. Do the inmates get paid? Like, do they get you know, how does that work with them when y'all do songs and make music with inmates? How does it work for them from a? So I mean, you said there's no contract, but just explain that process. Yeah,
so depending on where you are is going to determine how the royalties are dispersed. but the contract is still the contract. It doesn't change because you're incarcerated. So for an incarcerated person, they still own their masters. The split is still 60% artist majority. The merch is still 50-50 split. Everything is still a license and it's not owned by us. So everything is still the same. It just would depend on how we allocate it, depending on what state you're in. Because certain states have different rules when it comes to incarcerated people getting royalties or, even showing their face, right? So now maybe we can't make them a merch T-shirt with their face on it or something like that. And certain states have really, really strong victim rights groups in the political sphere of that state. It all depends on where you're at. Some states, the victim rights groups literally run the state, both sides, Democrats and Republican. So it can vary, but the contract remains the same.
So if it's a state that would restrict a prisoner from retaining do you hold the funds for them?
Yeah, so you said you was listening to my music earlier, right? So it's a saying, I'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission, right? Yeah. So however I have to get my artists paid, I will.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking like if you can't give it, can you hold it in escrow or give it if they had children
until they're released and stuff like that.
That's what
part of it is they assign a designated beneficiary. So
okay. Could be a family member. I see. Interesting. Okay.
I love that phrase, ask forgiveness instead of permission.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what my band did. And we did this thing where we went around the country playing in parking lots before big concerts. And that was our guiding principle. If we ask permission, it's not going to happen. But if we just ask forgiveness, we're good to go.
Right. They may say, "Oh, y'all killing it. Go ahead, rock out." You know what I mean? We like it. Right. Never know.
Kiva, I do have a few questions. Can I?
Yeah, jump right in.
Cool. So one of the coolest things I think about DJC is that it seems to really give the creator a new identity. It's literally a new word to describe them, where they were a prisoner, but it gives them a chance to have this identity as artist, and where they've been in there for however long. Can you see that change in them when they work on a project with you all, or what is there an observable transforming effect? What's it like seeing that?
Yeah, so I think that goes back to our mission as far as dismantling stereotypes around prison and race, because these people are already artists, right? The people we sign are like already musicians. They're already artists. They're already multifaceted, if you will. For instance, Simply Naomi, the woman who Fury brought up, I was incarcerated with her. I did my 10 years. She was a lifer. She did 37 years. For 35 years, she ran the choir. Literally every person, not every person, but all different walks of life. You didn't have to be Christian. You wanted to go see Miss Naomi at church every Sunday. She was a star, still is a star. So it's one of those things where, they already were artists. I was already an artist before I ever, met Fury. I might have not been, a professional making money doing music, but I've always been a writer, a songwriter, a rapper. I've always been who I am. So it's more so about exposing those sides to the listeners like you all. Y'all see one side, or y'all don't see a side at all, because a lot of times we're just not seen or heard. Mm-hmm. So it's more about presenting those sides to you all as the audience.
Wow.
Yeah, and when someone has committed a crime resulting in incarceration, so many, that the consequence is you lose most of your freedoms. But what's cool about DJC is that there's really you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like one of the only freedoms that remains would be the freedom of self-expression. And I was just wondering, is that must be hard to keep alive when you're inside? Like, is it hard to keep that will to express yourself alive?
I think it's phases. I think it depends on the person and what they're experiencing. You know, there's been times where I've went into prison and I've walked out with bags and bags of material. And then there's been times where I was in such a dark place of, you know, like when I went back to prison the second time, I just didn't have it. I just couldn't do it. It was just, I was just in a really dark place. So I think it depends individually. It depends on how much you are mentally free to be able to do some of those things and be able to not be so caught up in the everyday whirlwind. It depends on your demographic. There's a lot of things, like if you're an older person, you might be experiencing severe health problems and not being heard, not being seen. They're not helping you. You're not thinking about writing a fucking song when you're in, you know, pain all day and they're not doing anything about it. And you don't know what's wrong with you. So it just all depends on like where you're at in your incarceration. When I was younger, absolutely. When I was younger, we used to meet up in the yard every Saturday and write. Me and the artists that we're actually working with now, Dallas the Dove, we used to meet in the yard 8:00 in the morning and just write songs together. You know what I mean? It all depends on if you make time for it. You can, though. You can always make time for yourself. It ain't nothing but time.
Right. And add to that, like the natural inclination of an artist to just be at the mercy of inspiration, regardless of if you're locked up or like, you know, people who aren't locked up have, you know, weeks, months, years where it's like, I'm just not feeling it. I don't want to create anything. So
I think people who have served longer sentences too sometimes can lose out hope because like they might not see an end date for Sunshine. So it's like, well, even when I get out, well, rather, I'll never get out. So I'll never have an opportunity to release music because no one's getting access to prisons to record music. I think for people who have an out date, they might be a little more hopeful. But like I know from working with Miss Naomi, we were corresponding for a little while. And then as soon as I was denied access to the prison, she stopped writing to me at the time because she thought she was going to die in prison. And she was just like, man, what's the point? You know, Thank God she got commutation 4 years later.
But she didn't stop working the choir. So like, she still was an artist. She still was singing. She still was directing her choir, you know, you know, so her musicianship didn't stop. She just stopped writing you. She just stopped writing you.
That one hurt.
You know what I mean?
I was like, where did she go?
I'm interested. I'm interested in hearing and learning about the process of making music in prison. Fury, you mentioned that you ran through, hit a wall or barrier to getting in. So how do you navigate? And you all have programs in different states, so of course you need to know the process and that works in those various states. But just walk us through like a successful, like how did you get in? Like tell us about one prison you're doing a program in, and how did you navigate through all of that stuff to do what you do?
Yeah, and even like I just want to add a little addendum there. Like, what was the gear situation? Like how? What do you all use, and like how does it get done sonically? You know what I mean?
Well, for the access part, I'll start there. The first one was just a total fluke. I was 24 years old. I went on what's now Justice Arts Coalition's website. It used to be called Prison Arts Coalition. And they just had like this resource list of a ton of arts programs in prisons. And I pretty much reached out to anyone that was still functioning and was sort of related to music, like even like theater shit, like Shakespeare, Behind Bars or whatnot. And then the one lead that I got out of like 40, 50 inquiries was this prison in Ohio, and the choir director there happened to be like kind of hippie, activist woman, Dr. Roma. And she had just read the new Jim Crow also and was like super inspired by it. And I nagged her for over a year, and eventually she got us in. And then there was a long period, over 2 years, where I was just getting denied left and right from everywhere, including Pennsylvania, where BL was at the time. And then I met a guy named Justin Jones. It's kind of that simple. I mean, he used to run the Department of Corrections in Oklahoma, and his hair was longer than mine. I used to have really long hair. Total rocker guy, loves music, loved the project. Within 20 minutes of meeting him, he was like, so let me know, what can I do? I want you to get into these prisons. And then within, I'd say 6 to 10 months from then, I'd gotten access to like 3 or 4 more prisons. It's really about who you know and persistence. And of course, when you do submit a proposal, it's got to be crisp, it's got to be clear what you want. You got to know who to send it to. Try to send it to headquarters so you can hop over, all the middlemen and stuff in the facilities or whatnot. And Hail Mary, because also, there have been a bunch of places where Justin did introduce us and we were still denied.
Right.
In terms of gear, they could put you anywhere in a prison, like to record, you don't have a say. So like you can go to the gym, you can go on the pod in like a janitor's closet or wherever. So, you gotta just have a really, really great mic and create a space where, like, if we gotta, put blankets up, on PVC pipe to like close the air, just create the best condition that you can to get the best raw, dry vocal take. A lot of other things are done in post. We just try to get the most clean, raw vocal that we can.
Artists who play, we tend to let them just use their own instruments because oftentimes, they have the feel for what they're playing already. We also have like an instrument into prison campaign that we do that has sent over 18 grand worth of musical gear to over 10 different prisons. Totally volunteer run. Shout out to Ted, our volunteer coordinator. But yeah, we haven't actually recorded at those facilities yet, where we've donated gear just because of, the pandemic and stuff, but we'll be back at a couple of them at least.
There are a couple of different ways you can look at what you're doing. One is what it means to you two individually, yourselves, your professional fulfillment, making a living doing this and that sort of thing. A second way of looking at it is externally, the people that you're working with. You're creating, I'm imagining you're creating a sense of dignity for them, and the value that they get out of it, not just money, in a difficult environment. And then the third way I've been looking at this is externally. Most people, myself included, have never encountered someone who's been in prison. I don't know whether the appropriate way to talk about them is people who are incarcerated or prisoners. What's the way to talk? I don't have a feel. There's a narrative where people just stop. They're prisoners. That's all they think, Yeah. And maybe from a religious concept, we're taught to go into the prisons and that sort of thing. But there's this public narrative issue, and looking externally, is it part of your mission to create a better way of a more empathetic, a more holistic way of looking at people who are incarcerated? Is there reform around what you're doing? Is you talked about systematic things, obstacles you have to overcome. So maybe could you both of you talk the 3 different perspectives? I think it might be interesting, and it goes to sort of the heart of what we're trying to do here is racial social equity as an underpinning of all those things.
Yeah, Fury, let me go first because you know my memory's bad. I'm gonna try to keep up with
Sorry, complicated question. Don't worry
I
about
was going to say, how are they? I can't even remember what the questions were.
So first, the personal fulfillment, right? For me personally, being an artist and then becoming a record executive for other artists who are incarcerated, has given me a great sense of accountability for myself and great sense of responsibility and leadership in this space. And that keeps me upright. I've been a criminal for a long time. For the majority of my life, I started selling drugs when I was 18. I'm 11 years old or 12. So, having a 20-year span or so, maybe not a full 20, but longer than I was alive for sure, that I, was involved in criminal activity. Sometimes those ways are just there. So this made me realize, it's bigger than me. People are watching me. People are inspired by what I'm doing, right? And I have a responsibility to my community to, keep being a success. So it keeps me accountable, and I actually love that for me. The second thing you said was you imagine that we give a sense of dignity to some of the artists. And while I don't disagree, you may be right. What I will say is the most dignified person I've ever met or people I've ever met are lifers. And that's just because you don't have experience with them. So I'm trying to dismantle the stereotype, right, around race in prison. So when you encounter a lifer as a person who's been in prison, you can tell by the way they walk, by the way their head is up, by the sense of dignity that they walk with. They are the most dignified women that I've ever been around. They sit up straight. You respect them at all times. You don't curse in their presence. You call them such and such. You get yourself together when you're around them, the older lifers, and they are a very, very, they're just very dignified people. So there's that. But I can imagine that there may be some other demographic or some other person where that may not be the case. So I'm not going against you. I'm just saying people are just humans. We're just regular people back there. It's really that simple. And I know that sounds really simple, but it's a lot to wrap your head around if you really, really think about it. There's people that look like you, there's people everywhere, all different backgrounds, all different everything. And then you said something about the narrative about people being called prisoners or whatever. I will say inmate is kind of played out. We try not to use inmate these days. I didn't really care to correct my guy over here because Dave, because I don't really, it doesn't move me like that. I'm not offended or anything. So I will say incarcerated people or, I don't really think anything's too wrong with prisoner. But here's my thing with the speech thing. A lot of people put a lot of their work into just talking about it. I don't give a fuck what you're talking about. I care about what you're doing, right? So we're all sitting here on this podcast and we're all trying to, fellowship and break bread and get to know one another from this standpoint. So I'm not going to harp on the fact that Dave said inmate, right? Because he's doing something. He's trying to involve himself in this work, right? So just, be aware of the people who all they're focused on is saying a bunch of long ass sentences, but they ain't doing much, okay? And I think that was it. I think I covered everything. Was there? Am I missing?
Good. You did.
Yeah,
I have a better memory than you said. How about you, Fury?
Yeah, no, I had a totally different answer if I can even remember the juice of your question. But one thing to piggyback just off what BL was just saying is that, I agree with that sentiment. I think that in the work that we do, racing to social justice, if you will, there's going to be awkward moments. There's going to be clumsy moments, especially, linking with people who maybe come from different walks of life than yourself. That goes both ways. So let there be awkward moments. That's part of the fun. If you want to look at it that way, it's part of the fun. Me and Mo, me and BL have had so many awkward moments. We're from totally different cultures, but like she was just saying, people are people. And, there's a lot more common ground than you would suspect. And I'd imagine, John, that if you were to go to a facility, you'd probably make friends pretty damn quickly. Who's that interesting white guy? I want to talk to him. They'd ask you a million questions, and before you know it, you might have a little gang. But the main thing that sticks out to me from your question, though, John, is in terms of the external part. I was just listening to this interview that Rick Rubin did with Brian Eno. I love Brian Eno, who's one of my favorite musicians ever, and he was saying how, like, as kids, we play, right? And then people think that as adults, you stop playing, like you just lose your sense of play. But what Brian Eno was saying is that we adults do play, but they play in art. And I think that we imagine new worlds in art. Art is like a simulation, so I think that what Die Jim Crow does is we imagine new worlds by dismantling stereotypes around race in prison. You do that through sharing people's stories, through sharing people's art, through hearing what people who are in the belly of the beast have to say. And like, I don't identify as a prison abolitionist, which is a kind of common thing, especially among, I would say, coastal elites who are prison activists. I do not identify as one. However, I do think that by playing, by imagining these worlds, by creating art, we do get closer to a vision of a totally different system and a totally different way of life. And what better way to do that through art, of course, but also just that we're so far away from that, from like a place of abolition. I think art is a great stepping stone, because it's like you can't even get access to a prison to, I don't know, let someone go to their mom's funeral, or on the other end, like a person inside can't get out to go to their mother's funeral or whatever. So for us to be able to get in and just break down those walls of like the inside and the public, that's huge in and of itself. And trying to get laws changed around like, no, we want to be able to show incarcerated people's faces. No, we want to be able to pay incarcerated people royalties. We want to be able to release music from incarcerated people that's not censored. You know what I mean?
Is there a rehabilitative aspect to this that the prison, the people that run the prison see? You mentioned your colleague that got it right away and facilitated. Was that because he saw this as a way to rehabilitate?
Well, he did tell me once that when he was the director of corrections in Oklahoma, and he of course oversaw death row, he had to be there for 28 executions, and he's strongly anti-death penalty, but he was required to as the director of corrections. Anyway, there were a few units where the death row was just kind of intense. There was a lot of violence going on, and he was actually the first person, according to him, to introduce MP3s to death row, and the rates of violent incidents went way, way, way down. And he said that not only was there a lot more camaraderie amongst the folks who were incarcerated on death row, but even amongst the staff, because the staff would start to recommend music to the folks inside, and then vice versa.
Yeah, I was on the heel of that. I was going to ask, as a nonprofit, one of the things we know is I worked for several nonprofits back in the day, and I know that data drives donations, right? And so on the heels of what John was saying about in terms of the rehabilitative aspect of it, do you all collect like any data, like as a result of being in your program, this particular incarcerated individual has had a reduction in, violent incidents, during, like, what do you track any of that stuff? Because I think tracking that will give you open up a lot of doors in terms of generating additional support for what you do.
You're very correct. We are actually trying to look into getting like some broad, like detailed research because it takes some money to actually do that. But we do have our recidivism rate, which is pretty low. What is this? What is it now, Fury?
I mean, it's less than 10%, I'd say.
You mean with people that you've worked with that have been released?
Yeah, who've gone back.
Yeah,
that's a good data point right there.
Yeah,
that's huge data point.
But we also have we have working musicians out in the force. Like I try to just until we have like all that data, right? I mean, you have me, right? Somebody who's a working musician, co-executive director, have learned a lot of nonprofit experience. You have Simply Naomi, who she's also the commutation specialist for Lieutenant Fetterman. She's helped free over 15 lifers since she's been out. But she's a working musician. She works teacher's assistant at Yale and Wesleyan, and she does her gospel shows, and we do our plays together. We're trying to create, more working musicians in the workforce. And, that's the ultimate, like, blessing or privilege, like I would rather do that than to make $1 million doing something I hate. I would rather be able to live off making music, something I love. So we're trying to grant the ultimate privilege to people, and to be incarcerated or formerly, and to be able to then live your dream, just being a working musician. Like you said earlier, it's not about creating stars. It's just about having the privilege of doing what you love. I think that's like the ultimate privilege in America.
Right.
Wow. You I could say you had me at hello on this, but when you mentioned Yale and Wesleyan, I couldn't have. I went to Wesleyan and Hogue went to Yale.
Hey.
Oh, hey!
You didn't know that, right?
That flew right by me too.
Come to my show in December. I have a show at Yale in December. I have a show in Columbia on Monday.
Cool.
Wow! Wait, Columbia University?
When in December?
Yeah. December 3rd, I think. It's called Echoes of Attica.
It's a little before you're coming up here, Dave. That's too bad.
Well,
I'm not sure. Look it up. I could be wrong. Look it up. But it's called Echoes of Attica. It's about the Attica uprising. We actually have a Attica survivor. His name is Carlos Roche. He's also present at the play. And it's like it's only the monologue of the actual federal transcripts. The actual transcripts, and then me and Miss Naomi, Simply Naomi, we do the music in between. It's pretty powerful.
Oh, that's awesome. Send me the information on those two. The one on Columbia University too. The dates for that.
Okay.
I would love to see if I can get down there.
We'll do. I got you.
That's awesome.
I want to know.
This. I know we have a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to ask you, BL. I'm real curious about the BL. What is that? Is that initial? Help us understand what the BL is for.
So the BL stands for bearded lady.
Okay.
It's an inside joke between me and my friends. Remember I told you it was my band name.
Okay.
And basically the admin hated us, like the superintendent, because we were like the young problem children of the whole event. It was always something. Somebody broke their ankle. Somebody's horse. It was just like we were drama filled. Somebody wanted to hang with their girlfriend and not come to practice. You know what I mean? We was just full of drama. And she hated our name, which I can barely remember nowadays. But then we just decided to we was like, let's name ourselves like BL Shirelle. Like white people are gonna love that.
Right.
We came in and it was like, our name is BL Shirelle. And they're like, oh, BL Shirelle, we love that. But it was for bearded lady because that's what my friends sometimes jokingly called me. And Shirelle is my middle name. So
your middle name, got it. I know growing up in urban communities, I grew up in Brooklyn, and so everybody used to call me Douse. That was my nickname. Nobody knew who my real name was for all the way up until like 20 something. Because we all, and it's like this urban culture that you get a nickname. So that's why I asked.
Yeah, well, my nickname is Mo. My real name is Monique. My nickname is Mo. So if somebody knows me, they call me Mo. White people call me BL.
BL it is.
You heard me flip up earlier. I said Mo before.
Yeah. I heard you say that. Okay. So there's a connection.
We've all got
real quick. Hold on. Just because John said we could ask you questions, so I just got to ask. Being that Kiva, you're from New York and you used to spin records in Long Island. Favorite Long Island MC?
I gotta go with Eric B. and Rakim, hands down. I wouldn't choose anybody. Huh?
EPMD would be mine, but you can't,
go
wrong with Eric B. and Rakim. Good pick.
Yeah. Yep. That's who I would go with.
Nice.
All right.
I would love to have you talk, Bill, about your own music that you create and how it relates to your experience.
So for a long time, my music was like a one big trauma dump. It wasn't meant for the public. That's the thing. I wrote very private. I wrote like a journal. Mm-hmm. And then once, like, it was a journal that rhymed. That's all it was. And then I started sharing it with the world. So it was just very intrusive. Not intrusive, but it was very open, honest, raw. And it worked. And it works.
Victim getting life flighted. Charges, murder, indictment. OG saying bite it. Jailhouse lawyers telling you to fight it. Wifey got you on silent. Shit, so do your side bitch. Sully said it's election year. I don't know what that mean. It mean if you lose, you get in the electric chair. Plea offers hella years. You gotta hold in a well of tears. Can't cry all these melons in here. You ain't getting no melanin. Think about telling you hella scared. But if you tell they're talking shit, you're coffin pick to put a nail in there.
But maturing now, I'm looking to challenge myself a little further. I'm looking to talk about more things that are not exactly me and my lifestyle. Like, my favorite rappers are people who I believe that they can say they shot somebody 1,000 times in the face. And if I believe it, it works for me because I believe it. I never really liked people who were like narrating. I like to believe you did what you were talking about. And I was the same artist. I talked about my experience. But now I want to gain an appreciation for writing about other people's experience. And I want to be, I want to have a more range of emotion. So right now I can give you like a sexy record. I can give you a very deep introspective, pain-filled record. I can give you a fun ghetto ratchet record. But I want to try, like, what about a happy record? What about a peaceful record? You know what I mean? Like, so I want to try to expand my emotions in my music. That's the stage that I'm at now. But, my discography is pretty impressive. It's pretty good. It's just really raw and introspective.
I think it's a great answer because my theory that really great artists are constantly changing. They're constantly curious. They're constantly challenging themselves, and that's what you were expressing. I think that's good.
I like the authenticity response too. Because I think a lot of artists, particularly in the hip hop world, it's this glorification of the culture, and it gets a lot of people in trouble because they're rapping about something that they're not really living, and that tends to cause a lot of conflict. And, people talking about Pablo Escobar and this and that, and they never even met the man, don't even know where he's from. But you hear this glorification of these big, drug dealers and stuff like that. And it's in the records. And it's what they call fake rapping, fake MCs. When I was growing up, that's what they called them, fake MCs, people who talk about stuff that they have no experience with. So I really appreciate your BL, your authenticity and your raw stance to, really talking about and making music about what you believe in. I think that and what you have experienced. That's the
And honestly, I think that it's like, so when I was going through all the worst times in my life, right, and I was sharing all of that with you all, I think it would be disingenuous for me to still pretend that's where I'm at. Why would I not be willing to share the other side of that journey? Why would I keep, not to say that I'll never like talk like that again, because this is the trauma and stuff that I've lived with for the rest of my life. I survived the police shooting. Some things will never change for me, but there are some good things happening. So it will be disingenuous of me to not represent that. And it would be, that wouldn't be fair to the people who are on the journey with me.
That's awesome. I think that's a great way for us to land the plane because life is evolutionary. Music is evolutionary. It changes. And we so appreciate the two of you coming on and joining us in this conversation. I've learned a lot, particularly around how you all stay steadfast, the persistence, to impenetrate it. So you're doing in reach. Most places they have what they call when they try to get the incarcerated individual back into the community. I forget the terminology, what they call reintegration. Yeah, trying to get them. But what y'all are doing is y'all are actually going in. You're doing in reach and not just outreach. And I just think it's an awesome work. So thank you all for joining us. John, any closing remarks before we?
Just really thanks. I really enjoyed it. Love your model and wish you the best of success. And thanks for joining us. It was very enlightening for me and very powerful.
I have so many more questions.
Me too.
I'm just going to email you.
That'll work.
I mean, you can answer at your leisure, but I have a list of questions here. But this was. I mean, I want to know more about the Lady Lifers. Were you in that?
Damn.
Were you in that was the TED Talk thing with like, "This is not my home."
Yeah, that's the one.
Awesome. I mean, just seeing all the.
Yes.
So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the Black Barbie video. Who made that?
Yep, I saw that. Yeah, that was awesome. That was very creative.
Gary made it.
So good. And awesome. I think I do want to just mention something that I saw Mike Tennyson say, which I want to know more about as well. But again, we'll continue that on email. But he had a quote on there that seems to it makes me it's like encapsulates the DJC thing. And he says, a door opened to show the humanity inside me that's been here all my life. And that's pretty much exactly what BL, I kept thinking when you said that they didn't become artists. They were always artists. They weren't always prisoners. They were always artists. They were always people. They became prisoners at some point, but this has been thank you for talking.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you guys for having us. Appreciate it.
You just got me choked up, Hope.
Awesome. Well, thank everybody. Thank you all out there for listening and watching our Race to Social Justice podcast. Please join us again for another courageous conversation. And also make sure that you don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you can keep up to date with us as we continue to run this race. And we thank you all for being here today. Thank you.
Peace.
The Race to Social Justice podcast is produced, edited, and mixed at The Dream in Austin, Texas. Visit thedreamrecordingstudio.com for more info.